What do a gay medieval historian, a Nazi death camp commander, and a 12th century poem have in common? A cup, a legend, and a regime willing to burn the world to possess it. This is not the history you read in school. This is the shadow history, the one hidden between footnotes and folklore. A tale of forbidden expeditions, occult obsessions, and sacred relics turned into tools of propaganda. Why did the Nazis fund missions to the ruins of Bolivia, the monasteries of Tibet, and the haunted forests of Karelia? What were they really hoping to find in ancient stones, forgotten chants, and bloodlines buried beneath? Centuries? Was it power, myth, or something even darker? From castle ruins said to guard the Holy Grail, to prehistoric shrines draped in SS banners, from stolen voices sealed on tape, to mountains that refused to speak. This is the story of the Nazi regime's most secret and surreal missions. Because when truth wasn't enough, they chased legends. When history failed them, they tried to rewrite it. And in doing so, they left behind something stranger than fiction. Some mysteries are meant to be explored. Others are warnings. Welcome to the dark quest. They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's whispered by the dreamers before they're erased. Otto Rahn was one of those dreamers. Not a soldier, not a spy, not even a believer in Nazi ideology. He was a medievalist, a historian, and most dangerously of all, a romantic. In the crumbling castles of southern France, he wasn't looking for power. He was looking for a story, a legend, a sacred cup, the Holy Grail. But to Rahn, it wasn't the cup of Christian orthodoxy. It wasn't silver, it wasn't gold. It was Cathar. He believed the heretic sect known as the Cathars, wiped out in a brutal 13th century crusade, had hidden the Grail in the caves and ruins of Montsegur, and that it was never a cup, but a symbol, a key to a purer spirituality, a forgotten truth. His writings were poetic, visionary, and dangerous, because in Berlin, a man named Heinrich Himmler was reading them, and he saw something else in Rahn's myth. He saw a blueprint. To Himmler, the Grail wasn't spiritual, it was racial. He believed Jesus was not Jewish but Aryan, that the Grail was not sacred because of Christ's blood, but because it proved the existence of a divine Aryan bloodline, a bloodline that the SS must recover and claim. So Rahn was summoned, funded, shielded, and leashed. He was sent to the Pyrenees, twice, accompanied by SS agents, tasked with finding a relic that may never have existed, but the ruins didn't speak. The verses wouldn't align, and the deeper he went into the fog of medieval poetry, the more the modern Reich tightened its grip. Rahn tried to resist. He never wore a uniform. He openly associated with artists, homosexuals, and dissidents. He was an embarrassment and a liability, so they began to break him. They censored his work. They demanded loyalty, and when he refused, they watched. In 1939, Otto Rahn was found dead in the snow-covered Alps. No note, no farewell, just a man, frozen beneath the sky he once imagined housed angels and lost gods. The official story was suicide, but to those who knew him, it was something else. A warning, a message from the regime. Even dreamers are expendable when their dreams don't serve the machine. And what of the Grail? It was never found, but the search didn't end with Rahn. For Himmler, this was only the beginning, because if the relic couldn't be unearthed in the ruins of France, perhaps it was hidden somewhere even older, etched in stone, buried in myth and waiting, somewhere the Reich would follow next. In the heart of Germany, where the forests grow thick and the air hangs heavy with ancient breath, a cluster of jagged sandstone pillars pierces the sky. Locals call it Externstein, the stone of the outside. To geologists, it's a natural wonder. To pilgrims, it's a mystery. But to the Nazi SS, it was holy ground. Not because of what was known, but because of what could be imagined. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler stood before these monoliths and didn't see erosion. He saw revelation, not of the past, but of the future he intended to create. He believed the Externstein were once the axis of the ancient world, a spiritual center for the so-called Aryan. Race before Christianity shattered the old ways. He didn't just want to discover history here. He wanted to resurrect it. That same year, he unleashed the Ahnenerbe, his newly formed SS research division, upon the site. Their mission? Not archaeology, mythology. SS scholars began carving narratives from the stone, both figuratively and literally. They studied grooves in the rock as if they were ancient runes. They declared weather-worn depressions to be ritual altars. A medieval Christian relief was reinterpreted as a suppressed pagan code. They believed the Externstein was once home to the Irminsul, a sacred pillar worshipped by the Saxons as the cosmic tree of life, until Charlemagne's Christian armies destroyed it during their holy war. No physical proof was needed. For Himmler, faith in the myth was stronger than truth. Each April 20th, Hitler's birthday, SS youth were marched to the stones in the pre-dawn dark. Torches lit. Saxon hymns, newly penned by Nazi poets, echoed through the trees. Runic banners replaced the crucifix. The gods of blood and soil were reborn in the shadow of stone. But the stones did not speak. They did not echo back. No relics were found. No inscriptions revealed. No voices answered. Still, Himmler persisted. He ordered excavations, built observatories, commissioned paintings and rituals, all in search of a mythic anchor, a spiritual axis to justify empire, conquest, and extermination. Because if the Germanic people could be shown to descend from a sacred lineage, then every atrocity could be reframed as destiny. But the truth was indifferent. The Externstein remained silent. Its stones endured, unmoved by banners, rituals, or ideology. For Himmler, silence was unbearable. He needed whispers, chants, prophecies, something untouched by Rome, unbent by Christianity. And so his gaze turned east, beyond the forests, toward the mists of Karelia, where witches still sang in languages older than conquest. If the stones would not reveal the ancient truth, perhaps the old voices still would. In the heart of Germany, where the forests grow thick and the air hangs heavy with ancient breath, a cluster of jagged sandstone pillars pierces the sky. Locals call it Externstein, the stone of the outside. To geologists, it's a natural wonder. To pilgrims, it's a mystery. But to the Nazi SS, it was holy ground, not because of what was known, but because of what could be imagined. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler stood before these monoliths and didn't see erosion. He saw revelation, not of the past, but of the future he intended to create. He believed the Externstein were once the axis of the ancient world, a spiritual center for the so-called Aryan race before Christianity shattered the old ways. He didn't just want to discover history here. He wanted to resurrect it. That same year, he unleashed the Ahnenerbe, his newly formed SS research division, upon the site. Their mission? Not archaeology, mythology. SS scholars began carving narratives from the stone, both figuratively and literally. They studied grooves in the rock as if they were ancient runes. They declared weather-worn depressions to be ritual altars. A medieval Christian relief was reinterpreted as a suppressed pagan code. They believed the Externstein was once home to the Irminsul, a sacred pillar worshipped by the Saxons as the cosmic tree of life, until Charlemagne's Christian armies destroyed it during their holy war. No physical proof was needed. For Himmler, faith in the myth was stronger than truth. Each April 20th, Hitler's birthday, SS youth were marched to the stones in the pre-dawn dark. Torches lit. Saxon hymns, newly penned by Nazi poets, echoed through the trees. Runic banners replaced the crucifix. The gods of blood and soil were reborn in the shadow of stone. But the stones did not speak. They did not echo back. No relics were found. No inscriptions revealed. No voices answered. Still, Himmler persisted. He ordered excavations, built observatories, commissioned paintings and rituals, all in search of a mythic anchor, a spiritual axis to justify empire, conquest, and extermination. Because if the Germanic people could be shown to descend from a sacred lineage, then every atrocity could be reframed as destiny. But the truth was indifferent. The Externstein remained silent. Its stones endured, unmoved by banners, rituals, or ideology. For Himmler, silence was unbearable. He needed whispers, chants, prophecies, something untouched by Rome, unbent by Christianity. And so his gaze turned east, beyond the forests, toward the mists of Karelia, where witches still sang in languages older than conquest. If the stones would not reveal the ancient truth, perhaps the old voices still would. In the northern reaches of Europe, where the forests of Karelia stretch like a forgotten spell between Finland and Russia, time bends. The trees whisper, the wind listens, and memory lingers in places untouched by maps or machines. In the summer of 1936, a group of men crossed into this ancient forest, not with weapons, but with notebooks. Not for war, but something stranger. They were part of an SS-funded expedition, led by Jairo von Gronhagen, a Finnish aristocrat obsessed with ancestral memory. His task? To collect the last living remnants of a world before Christianity, before modernity, before history was written in ink instead of song. But he wasn't alone. With him was Fritz Bose, a Nazi musicologist. Their goal was simple: to record what remained of the Kalevala, Finland's epic of creation, not from books, but from the mouths of those who still sang it. And they found him, Timo Lehto, a man untouched by cities, by war, even by writing. He spoke in chants. He moved like smoke. His voice, deep, rhythmic, timeless, seemed to vibrate the trees themselves. The team recorded him for hours. To them, he was data. To him, it was breath. But it wasn't enough. On the edge of Lake Swajarvi, deeper in the forest, they were led to her. Miriam Aue, a 92-year-old soothsayer, known only in whispers as the Witch of the Woods. She lived in a hut woven from pine roots and ash. Villagers said she had dreamed of the SS before they arrived, that she warned them not to record her voice. Gronhagen insisted. He told her it was for preservation. She hesitated, then agreed. She chanted, the machine word, and something shifted. When Bose played the tape back, her face collapsed. "You've stolen my voice," she whispered. "It no longer belongs to me." She never spoke again. That night, frost formed inside their tents, though it was summer. The horses refused to enter the woods. And in every tape recorded afterward, a strange sound echoed beneath the reel, like breathing. They returned to Berlin with over 100 reels, filled with spells, myths, incantations, origin songs. To Himmler, they were pieces of a puzzle, proof of ancestral magic, a spiritual lineage to weaponize. But in Karelia, the last true voices fell silent, because you cannot dissect a culture without destroying its soul, and you cannot bottle spirit without killing it. The machine had captured the songs, but something else had been taken too. In January of 1939, as the world edged toward the abyss of war, a small group of German explorers slipped across the snowy thresholds of Tibet. To the public, it was a scientific mission: botany, zoology, ethnography. But beneath the polite smiles and official reports, the truth was far stranger. They were sent by Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, a man who believed Tibet held the primordial truth of the so-called Aryan race. At the head of the expedition was Ernst Schaefer, a young zoologist with a passion for wild creatures and ancient mysteries. But this journey was not about animals. It was about ideology, about proving that Tibet, this mysterious and isolated realm on the roof of the world, held the missing link in the Nazi mythos, a spiritual homeland of the original Aryans. They brought with them gifts, binoculars, rare spices, medical supplies. They entered temples with reverence, but also calculation. They smiled as they measured skulls. But what they found in Tibet was not what they expected. The monks were not hostile, nor were they reverent. They were amused. The Germans asked questions about bloodlines and divine races. The monks answered with riddles and silence. Schaefer wanted measurable data. The Tibetans offered parables. And then they saw it, painted on prayer flags, etched into stone, the swastika. But here it meant something entirely different. It wasn't a symbol of hate or empire. It stood for balance, for eternity, for the eternal dance of creation and destruction. It was ancient and sacred. To Schaefer, it was an uncomfortable contradiction. To Himmler, when he later saw the photographs, it was near blasphemy. The Nazi swastika, forged in violence, had come full circle back to its origin as a peaceful emblem, back to where it belonged. Still, the expedition continued. They took thousands of photos, made plaster casts of local faces, collected soil samples, mapped celestial alignments. They gathered everything except understanding. Before they left, they were invited to witness a sky burial, a Tibetan ritual in which the body is laid on a high plateau and given to the vultures. To Western eyes, it seemed barbaric. To the monks, it was release. Schaefer stood in silence, watching the vultures circle above the bones. For the first time, he seemed unsure. He returned to Germany weeks before the war. Himmler promoted him, gave him his own department in the SS. But Schaefer never returned to Tibet. And all the data he collected, the faces, the flags, the bones, none of it ever became the foundation of the Aryan myth, because Tibet had given him nothing. Only silence, only symbols he could not bend, only a mirror, quietly reflecting back everything the Reich didn't want to see. In 1928, long before war consumed Europe, a sunburnt German named Edmund Kiss stood alone among the shattered stones of Tiwanaku, Bolivia. He was not an archaeologist, not in the traditional sense. He was a believer, not in gods, but in cycles, in catastrophes, in cosmic memory buried beneath red soil and frozen stars. Kiss had come chasing a theory as bizarre as it was obsessive, the world ice theory, or Weltteilslehre, a fringe belief that Earth's history had been shaped not by gradual evolution, but by violent collisions with frozen moons, icy giants that once crashed from the sky, triggering extinctions and rebirths. And Tiwanaku, he believed, was the cradle of one such rebirth. They were Nordic relics, remnants of a hyper-advanced civilization from a forgotten age. He saw meaning where others saw mystery. He saw Greek crosses in the carvings, Baroque arches in the doorways, and celestial alignments that he claimed tracked a different moon from a time before the one we now know. In one sculpture, a man's head, deeply carved into stone, caught his eye. He feverishly sketched it, labeling it the face of a Nordic progenitor. To Kiss, Tiwanaku wasn't just a ruin. It was evidence, proof of an ancient Aryan civilization lost to time and ice. His writings were prolific, his theories outrageous. But to the Nazi Party and the growing machine of the Ahnenerbe, Himmler's SS-funded research division, they were not dismissed. They were embraced. Plans were drawn for a larger, state-sponsored expedition. More scientists, more equipment, more propaganda. But history, like the orbit of moons, shifted. World War II erupted. The expedition was canceled. And Tiwanaku, silent and patient, remained untouched by Nazi boots. What Kiss brought back were not artifacts, but interpretations. His theories found their way into Nazi publications, but never into credible scholarship. Today, we know Tiwanaku dates back to around 500 AD. A thriving pre-Columbian civilization, complex and mysterious, but human. Entirely human. No Nordic visitors. No lost moons. Just the brilliance of an ancient people living close to the stars. And yet, the site still hums with speculation. Because what Kiss uncovered wasn't truth. It was belief. So what were they really after? Was it simply power? Prestige? A twisted thirst for dominance? Or was it something more elusive? Something buried beneath history itself? At first glance, the Nazi expeditions to France, Bolivia, Tibet, and beyond might appear as the actions of deluded men chasing fantasy. But look deeper, and a more unsettling truth begins to emerge. These weren't random journeys of curiosity, they were deliberate, they were systematic, and they were desperate. Theory 1, race, blood, and myth. At the core of these expeditions was a myth of racial superiority, one the Nazis couldn't prove but desperately needed to. Himmler believed that to legitimize the Reich, they had to reclaim history itself. They sought proof that the so-called Aryan race had once ruled over a global civilization. From the chants of Karelia to the runes of Externstein to the astronomical alignments of Tiwanaku, they scoured the earth for anything that could be twisted into evidence. Because if they could show their ancestors once ruled the past, they could justify ruling the future. The danger wasn't just in what they believed, but in how much they needed others to believe it too. Theory 2. The occult machine. But what if it wasn't just about race? What if they weren't only after myths, but mechanisms? Some researchers believe these quests had ritualistic purposes, that the SS wasn't merely collecting artifacts, they were performing acts of magical engineering. Recordings of ancestral chants weren't just folklore. They were spells captured by magnetophone, stored like supernatural code. The Holy Grail wasn't just symbolic. It was believed to contain sacred blood, an energy source, a relic of power. Tiwanaku's monoliths weren't ruins. They were blueprints for a lost cosmology, perhaps even an ancient technology. These weren't museums they were building. They were laboratories, test sites, temples, and in their twisted vision, belief itself became a weapon. Theory 3. Pure desperation. But maybe the most haunting explanation is the most human one. That all of this, all the skull measurements, the stolen songs, the ancient ruins, was born not from confidence, but from fear. That the Nazis, for all their brutal certainty, were terrified. Terrified that beneath their flags and doctrines and uniforms, there was nothing, no moral ground, no spiritual foundation, just ashes and ambition. So they turned to legend, to fairy tales, to half-remembered myths twisted into doctrine. They sought validation not because they were strong, but because deep down, they knew they were hollow. They didn't find the Holy Grail. They didn't prove a master race. They didn't decode ancient power. But maybe what they uncovered was far more terrifying. A mirror held up to their own emptiness. And maybe that's a warning for all of us. The war is long over. The swastikas have crumbled. The leaders either executed or lost to fire and cyanide. The Reich fell, but some of its obsessions didn't. Because history doesn't always end in flames. Sometimes it lingers in stone, in song, in silence. At Externstein, the carvings remain, silent witnesses to torchlit rituals beneath banners of a false dawn. In Karelia, the stolen voices of the forest witches still wait, locked inside reels of tape no one dares play. In Tibet, the monks chant on, untouched, unbent, while their swastika, older than memory, flutters in harmony, rather than hate. And in Tiwanaku, the stones still face the stars, holding secrets too vast for any ideology to contain. The Nazis didn't find what they were looking for, but maybe the real danger wasn't the secrets they sought. It was what they were willing to become in the process. So here's the question. Do you think these ancient places still hold real power? Were the Nazis chasing shadows? Or did they brush against something truly forgotten? What's more dangerous? Myth believed, or myth weaponized? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more forbidden histories, click the video on your screen now, where we uncover the secret occult experiments that took place deep within Nazi Germany's own borders. Because some secrets don't stay buried forever.